welcome to Whispers of Ink. I'm Machado de Assis, and now I will read one of my stories.
Let's start with the book The Land of Chimeras, which is part of my novels collection. Chapter 1. My friend Tito sat at his worn wooden desk, lost in thought. A candle burned quietly beside him, its flame flickering in the still air. He was 20 years old, poor and clean-shaven, with no money and plenty of dreams. Around him, the silence felt heavy, filled only by the soft crackle of the candlewick. Tito wasn't tall, but he wasn't short either. In fact, he stood about average height, which I personally think looks best on a young man. His face had something angelic about its soft eyes, deep and kind, a straight nose that seemed almost noble, and lips that gave off a gentle charm. His forehead was wide, the kind that makes you imagine thoughts constantly flowing through it. If there were ever a young man fit to pose for painters or win hearts, especially among girls 15 or 20 years old, it would be Tito. But like every person and every coin, Tito had two sides. While his head and face could inspire admiration, the rest of him told a different story. His feet were oddly twisted, and his legs didn't look much better. It was hard to believe such beauty could exist above the neck, and give way so suddenly to awkwardness below. As he sat there, thinking about life, and how unpredictable it was, he might have been thinking of the sea, or rather, of how some people fear the ocean even more than land travel. After all, many prefer solid ground, believing it's safer than waves and storms. But truthfully, danger exists both on water and on land. Trains, though new, already had their share of sad stories. So there he sat, caught between big ideas and small comforts, a poet with nothing but time and hope, and a body that refused to match the grace of his face. Tito had everything and nothing. Nature seemed to split itself when creating him, giving him the finest and worst parts, leaving him in a state no different from a peacock's, proud and dazzling when he looked at his feathers, but humbled when he saw his legs and feet. His soul mirrored this same duality. He had no serious vices, but plenty of weaknesses, small flaws that weakened the good things in him. He was kind, truly kind, with a deep sense of charity. Like the divine master, he knew how to share his bread with those who had none, and he did it with joy in his heart and peace in his soul. No one ever claimed to see him harm even the rudest man or the most annoying creature, two things, in his view, not very different. On the contrary, there was that one time when he nearly got crushed under a carriage wheel just to save a thin, sleeping greyhound on the street. The dog, saved by Tito's courage, grew so fond of him that she never left his side. Now, as he sat deep in thought, she lay quietly on the table beside him, watching him with quiet loyalty. Still, Tito had his faults, and perhaps those faults were born from his own virtues. Years ago, he sold the poems he wrote not in the honest way of exchanging books for money, but in a way unworthy of any child of Apollo. His poems were sold outright, meaning that once he accepted payment, he gave up all rights to them. He had only one buyer, a wealthy man, obsessed with the idea of being a poet himself. Knowing how easily Tito could write verses, this man showed up one day at Tito's small, modest room and began the conversation like this. "My dear fellow," he said, "I come bearing a golden opportunity." Tito, Always polite, replied. Please, go on. I heard you write poetry, the man continued. It was true? Tito barely held back his irritation at the man's casual tone, and replied simply, It is true. Very well. Here is my offer. I'll buy from you, at a fair price, all your poems, not the ones already written, but everything you produce from this day forward, with the condition that I'll publish them as my own work. I don't add any other terms to this deal. I'll only say that I prefer odes and poems with emotional depth. What do you say? Do we have a deal? When the man finished speaking, Tito stood up and, with a clear gesture, told him to leave. The man had the sense that, if he didn't leave at once, things might turn ugly. He chose to walk toward the door, muttering between his teeth, You'll come looking for me. Just wait and see. Our poet forgot the whole incident the next day. But as the days passed, urgent needs began to knock at his door, pleading with soft eyes and threatening with hard hands. Tito had no money left. After a sleepless night, he remembered the man and decided to go find him. He introduced himself and said he was ready to accept the deal. The man, smiling with a devilish grin, gave him the first payment, on the condition that Tito would bring him the next day an ode to the Poles. Tito spent the night gathering words without meaning, such was his mental state, and delivered the poem the next morning. The man read it and said it was good. He even deigned to shake Tito's hand. That was the moral side of Tito. His sense of responsibility, his need to pay his bills, drove him to trade the gifts God had given him. And even so, we see that he resisted at first, only giving in when the rope was already around his neck. The table where Tito leaned was an old piece, carved in an older style. He had inherited it from an aunt who had died 10 years earlier. A bone and quill, a feathered quill, and some sheets of paper, those were Tito's tools. 2 chairs and a small bed completed all the furniture he owned. I've already mentioned the candle and the thin dog. It was late at night when Tito fell deep into thought and fantasy. The rain was coming down hard, and flashes of lightning lit up the sky every few seconds, revealing a horizon choked with dark, heavy clouds. Tito wasn't watching any of it. His head rested on his arms, which were folded on the table in front of him. He probably wouldn't have heard much either, lost as he was in thoughts about the dangers of different ways to travel. But why was this young poet thinking such strange thoughts? Let me explain, for the sake of curious readers. Like most 20-year-old poets, Tito had fallen victim to love's cruel grip. A pair of dark eyes, a graceful posture, a vision, an angelic figure, something like that, had struck his heart so deeply that it nearly brought him to death's door. His love sickness started as a fever. He stayed in bed for 3 days, until a neighbor woman, known for her knowledge of healing plants, cured him. She got rid of the fever, though not the love itself. Thanks to her care, Tito was back on his feet, which only added to her reputation as something of a witch, a title she had already earned through many miraculous cures. Once the worst of the illness passed, the love remained. It burned quietly now, calm and gentle, but no less strong. Tito was hopelessly in love. From that point on, he began stealing lines from the odes he was supposed to write for paying customers, using them instead for secret verses dedicated to the woman in his heart. In this way, he resembled Lord Dauphin, a noble lover known for his sincere and modest passion. They weren't alike in poetic talent, but they shared the same tragic luck in love. Unreturned love rarely leaves a person untouched. Either it leads to noble indifference, or it drags the soul into drama or foolishness. That was exactly the choice haunting my poor poet. After wasting hours trying to express his feelings in Latin verses that went nowhere, Tito finally decided to speak directly to the lady of his dreams. Tito stood no chance. When he finished speaking, the girl didn't even blink. Her voice was cold, sharp, and final. She told him to stop dreaming and get back to reality. She said it was time to forget muses and love poems and start worrying about himself. She wanted him to clean up his act and stop chasing foolish ideas. Don't get me wrong. I know she sounded harsh, but she wasn't some wild, reckless woman with no sense of honor. Quite the opposite. She was a model of purity and modesty. Her father, a retired militia captain, had raised her with strict discipline and old-fashioned values. He was a man of deep faith, not just in God, but in things most people had stopped believing in. He still trusted political promises and believed in the healing power of Egyptian onions. Tito was crushed. He tried to forget her. He really did. But her words stayed with him like a cold knife in his chest. Every time he laughed, every moment of joy, her voice would come back, slicing through his happiness. It was like a warning. Nothing good could last. Sadness was who he really was. It reminded him of how the ancient Egyptians used to place a coffin in the middle of a feast. Not to ruin the party, but to remind everyone that life is short. That the only truth waits for us in the grave. After some time passed, Tito tried to think clearly. He wanted to make sense of it all. Two ideas came to him, both bad in their own way. One was dramatic, the other just plain silly. But what could he do? This was the fate of hearts that no one understands. The first idea was to leave this world forever, a dramatic exit, like a hero from a tragedy. The second was simpler. He could take a trip, by land or sea, and get away from the city for a while. He quickly dropped the first idea. It felt too final, too bloody. The second one, though, that seemed more reasonable. It didn't hurt anyone, and it gave him time to heal. It was the better choice, not just for his heart, but for his pride and his will to live. Tito sat in his room, wondering how to leave the city. Should he go by land or by sea? Both options had their problems. As he tried to decide, someone knocked softly on the door, 3 quiet knocks. Who could it be? And why come see him at this hour? He thought maybe it was that man again, the one who always brought him trouble and long speeches about poetry. With a sigh, Tito got up to open the door, ready to hear another of those boring lectures. But what he saw made him gasp. Standing there was a creature like no other, a spirit, light and graceful, wrapped in soft white clothes that looked like mist and silk mixed together. Her feet seemed to barely touch the floor. Her face was calm and kind, and her eyes were dark and full of life. Golden curls fell gently over her bare shoulders, so beautifully shaped they looked like those of a goddess. She stepped into the room, stretched out her hand, and said in a gentle voice, "Close the door and sit at the table." Tito obeyed without thinking. He went back to his chair, eyes wide, never looking away from her. She sat across from him and started playing with the small dog beside her, which wagged its tail happily. They stayed like that for 10 minutes, neither saying a word. Then she looked straight into his eyes and asked, her voice as sweet as music, "What are you thinking?" "Poet, are you crying over a lost love? Hurting for men's unfairness? Or do you feel pain for us or sore for yourself?" Her words felt warm and close, like an old friend. Without asking why she cared, Tito answered honestly, "In thinking about God's injustice." "That doesn't make sense," she said. "God is justice itself." "No," he replied. "If he truly was, he would have shared love equally among all hearts. He wouldn't let one heart burn with love, while the other feels nothing. Love should always be mutual, so that a woman couldn't look coldly at a man when he gazed at her with love in his eyes." Tito's friend said to him gently, "It's not really you speaking, poet. It's your wounded pride because your feelings weren't returned. But what good are the muses to you now? Go into the sacred space of poetry, wrap yourself in inspiration, and there you'll forget the pain the world has caused you." Tito replied sadly, "Poor me, my poetry is cold, and my inspiration is gone." His friend asked kindly, "What do you need to bring life back to your poetry and inspiration?" Tito sighed. "I need what I don't have. And I don't have anything." "Anything? You exaggerate. You still have the gift God gave you, the talent that sets you apart from others. That should be enough." "Did you think about leaving this land behind?" "Yes, I did." "Well then, I've come at the right time. Will you come with me?" "Where to?" "Does it matter? Just come." "I want to. Maybe it will distract me." "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow? By sea or by land?" "No. Not tomorrow, not by sea, not by land. Today. And not by land or sea, but by air." Tito stood up and stepped back in surprise. The vision rose too. She asked him softly, "Are you afraid?" "Not afraid, just surprised." She smiled and said, "Come." "Well, have a wonderful journey," he repeated without thinking. "Let's go." Tito didn't know what to expect. Maybe he thought he'd see a balloon, but nothing could prepare him for what happened next. He watched in awe as two long white wings unfolded from the vision's shoulders. She began to flap them gently, and golden dust fell like soft rain from the feathers. She held out her arms. "Come." Without another word, she lifted him into the air. Together they rose higher and higher until they passed through the ceiling, which opened like a door. Above them was a sky clear and bright, full of stars shining their brightest light. A soft, poetic moonlight covered rooftops, flowers and grass below. They climbed upward. The journey had begun. Tito couldn't think straight. He floated, dazed, climbing upward without knowing why or where he was going. He felt the wind gently brushing the golden hair of the vision beside him, strands touching his face like a soft whisper from heaven, filling him with peace and sleepiness. The air was clean and cool. Tito, who had once studied the laws of physics before returning to poetry, thought they would soon feel the thinning of the atmosphere as they rose. But he was wrong. They kept rising higher and higher, yet the air stayed rich and full. The more they climbed, the easier it was to breathe. This thought crossed his mind quickly, then vanished. As he said before, he wasn't thinking clearly. He just kept rising, never looking down. Why would he look back at Earth? This vision could only take him to the sky. Soon Tito began to see planets face to face. It was just before dawn. Venus, paler, and more golden than usual, shone brighter than the stars, dazzling them with her light and beauty. Tito looked at the goddess of morning with deep admiration. But still, they rose. The planets passed by his side like wild horses racing through the sky. At last, they entered a place completely different from anything they had seen so far on this strange journey. Tito felt his soul grow wide and full in this new air. Was this heaven? He didn't dare ask. He stayed quiet, waiting for the journey to end. As they moved deeper into this place, his heart filled with joy. After a while, they landed on a planet. The fairy gently set the poet down, and they started walking. As they walked, the shapes around him, which had seemed like mist before, now looked real and solid. Tito now saw clearly. He was standing on a new world, unlike anything he had ever known. At first glance, it was more wonderful than the poetic beauty of Istanbul or Naples. But the more they walked, the more everything around him felt truly real. They finally reached the Grand Plaza, where the royal palace stood. The king's residence was, so to say, a mix of every architectural style ever known, including even the Chinese, which, by the way, played a major role in the building's design. Tito, eager to end his confusion and learn where exactly he had arrived, dared to ask his companion a question. "We are in the Land of Chimeras," she replied. "The Land of Chimeras?" "Yes, the Land of Chimeras. A place where 3 out of every 4 people travel to, even if you won't find it on any map or science book." Tito accepted her answer, but kept thinking. Why had he come here? What had brought him to this place? As he was lost in thought, the fairy told him they had reached the palace door. Inside the entrance hall, 20 or 30 soldiers smoked large seafoam pipes and seemed completely lost in the thick blue and white clouds coming from their mouths. They were chatting with as many noblemen, all of them enchanted by the smoke swirling in the air. When the two arrived, the soldiers stood straight and saluted. Then, they climbed the main staircase and reached the upper floors. "We're going to speak to the rulers," the poet's companion said. They walked through many rooms and long galleries. Every wall, just like in Dinah's poem, was covered with silver paper and shiny sequins. At last, they entered the great hall. The genius of trifles, described by El Pino, sat on a throne made of seashells. 2 real peacocks stood on each side as decoration. The king himself wore a live peacock on his head, tied by its feet to a kind of oversized turban, much larger than those worn by our priests. This headpiece stayed in place thanks to 2 wide yellow ribbons tied under his royal chin. The same kind of hat was worn by the court's lesser geniuses, who served as the world's viscounts, and now stood around the bright king's throne. Tito walked into the grand hall holding the vision's hand, and all around him, peacocks strutted and made their usual screeching noises. As he stepped inside, a whisper spread among the noble-looking but strange guests. The vision announced that she had brought someone born of the land, and everyone listened closely. Then came the introduction ceremony full of bows, gestures, and other odd formalities. Everyone had to perform the hand-kissing ritual. Tito wasn't the only one who bent down to kiss the ruler's hand. Every single guest did it too. Later, he learned that in this place, even the smallest act must follow strict tradition. Once the greetings were done, the great genius of the land turned to the poet and asked what kind of honor he received back home. He wanted to assign a proper guide to show Tito around. "Well," said Tito, "I guess I'm called Mercy sometimes." "That's all? Then I'm afraid you'll have to be shown around by the common guide. We have lordship, excellency, grandness, and many more." But as for Mercy, she used to live here a while, but became so useless that I decided to let her go. As he said this, two proud figures, Lady Lordship and Lady Excellency, turned away from Tito with a shrug and a cold sideways glance full of disdain. Tito tried to ask the vision why they acted like that, but she pulled his arm gently and pointed toward the genius of trifles. His eyebrows had lowered angrily, just like old poets say Jupiter's would before a storm. At that moment, a group of young women entered the hall, fresh-faced, cheerful, pretty, and fair-haired. They danced in with light steps and bright smiles, bringing life to the room. Oh, but this blonde was unlike any we know in Brazil. They came running in, as quick and graceful as swallows in flight. After playfully shaking hands with the lesser court spirits, they went straight to the supreme genius, before whom they bowed about 10 or 12 times. Who were these girls? My poet stood there, wide-mouthed in surprise. He asked his guide and found out they were the Utopias and Chimeras, fresh from Earth, where they had spent the night in the company of people of all ages and backgrounds. The supreme genius welcomed them warmly, even deigning to smile and gently pat their cheeks. Happy and smiling, they accepted these royal gestures as if they were their right. Then, after another 10 or 12 bows, just like the ones before they left the room, but not without hugging or pinching my poet, who stared at them in shock, unsure why he had become the target of such cheerfulness. His amazement only grew when each girl whispered in his ear a phrase commonly heard at masquerade balls: "I know you." Once they were all gone, the genius gave a signal, and every eye turned to the supreme genius, eager to hear what he would say next. That expectation, however, was disappointed, because the gracious monarch simply motioned to the common tour guide, pointing out the poor visitor who had come from Earth. Then followed the formal goodbye ceremony, which lasted many long minutes due to all the bows, curtsies, and hand kisses in the usual fashion. The three poet, guiding fairy, and tour guide moved into the Queen's chamber. The royal lady was someone truly worth seeing. She was both majestic and elegant. She wore a dress and undergarments made of fine gauze, white satin slippers, and jewels of every kind and color on her arms, neck, and head. Her face had the most delicate makeup, applied so skillfully that she seemed painted by nature itself. From her hair came the scent of strong perfumes and soft oils, adding to her charm. Tito couldn't hide how strange and overwhelming everything looked. He turned to his travel companion and asked the name of that goddess. "Just right there," the fairy replied. "Don't you see the 300 young women working all around her?" Tito looked again, puzzled. "Well then," the fairy went on, "that's Fashion herself, surrounded by her beautiful picky daughters, 300 of them." At that, Tito suddenly thought of Hyssop. There was no doubt in his mind anymore. He had truly entered the land of chimeras. But then he reasoned, if Dinas spoke of these things, He must have come here and returned. That's already proven. So I don't need to fear being stuck here forever. This thought calmed him. He turned his attention back to the Queen's companions. They were busy creating new fashions, preparing them to enter the world and replace the old ones. The introduction followed all the formalities of the court. Tito felt a chill run through him as he gently kissed the Queen's slender, soft hand. She didn't notice she was too busy looking at herself in a small mirror she held in her left hand. The three visitors asked permission to keep exploring the palace and were allowed to walk through the halls and rooms of the grand castle. Each room was filled with groups of people, men, women, or both, who worked on different tasks, either set by the laws of the land or ordered directly by the ruler. Tito moved from room to room, eyes wide, confused by what he saw: the jobs, the customs, the personalities. In one room, a group of 100 people were flattening a white, light, and fluffy substance. Of course, Tito thought, this must be the kitchen. They're making some special dish for the king's lunch. He asked the guide if he was right. The guide answered, "No, sir. These people are preparing brain matter, yes. You heard me, for many kinds of people across all walks of life. Politicians, poets, lovers, and so on. It's also used for women. The crowd was especially for those who, on their own world, live with the very spirit of our country. And we present this essential element to them. Is it chimera dough? The finest ever seen, can you see it?" The guide smiled. He called the head waiter and asked for some of the dough. The man promptly went to the storage room and brought back a portion, which he handed to Tito. As soon as the poet took it in his hands, the dough vanished, as if it were made of smoke. Tito was embarrassed, but the head waiter, patting him on the shoulder, said, "Don't worry, we always have more. Our raw material is right here, comes from our own atmosphere, which never runs out." The head waiter had a charming face, but like all chimerical beings, he often got lost in thought. Tito couldn't get another word out of him, because as he finished speaking, the man began to stare at the ceiling and follow the flight of a fly. This caught the attention of his companions, who gathered around and joined him in watching the little insect buzz around. Tito and his friends continued walking. Further ahead, they came to a room where many chimerical beings sat around tables, discussing different ways to inspire diplomats and leaders of our world to fill their days with excuses and frighten people with nonsense and scarecrows. These men looked sharp and clever, but the ruler had given strict orders not to enter that room during working hours, and guards stood at the door. Any interruption of their meeting would be seen as a public disaster. Tito wandered from room to room, from gallery to gallery, here visiting a museum, there watching a performance or a game. He had all the time he needed to see everything, to examine every detail with care. As he passed through the main hallway that looked out over the square, he noticed a crowd gathered below the windows, surrounding a gallows. There was going to be an execution. A death sentence? Tito asked himself, thinking of the laws of his own land. No, they replied. It was a crime of high rudeness. It was a chimerical who had failed to bow in time and with grace. This crime is seen in that land as the greatest possible act of boldness, almost unthinkable. The people of Chimeras watched the punishment like an audience at a circus show, clapping and shouting in joy. Meanwhile, it was lunchtime for the royal family. At the great genius king's table sat only the king himself, the queen, 2 ministers, a doctor, and the enchanting fairy who had brought my poet to those heights. Before sitting down, the fairy asked the king if she could invite Tito to join them for lunch. The king agreed, and so Tito took his seat. The lunch was the shortest and fastest one imaginable. It lasted just a few seconds. Afterward, everyone stood up, and the table was cleared for the royal game. Tito went to watch the game. Around the room were chairs where the utopias and chimeras sat. Behind these chairs stood noble chimerical gentlemen dressed in red robes, each holding a peacock. Tito used this moment to find out how these girls knew him. He leaned on the back of a chair and asked the utopia who sat there. She asked for permission, followed the usual formalities, and then led the poet into another room. "There," she asked. "Don't you really know who we are? Don't you recognize us?" "I don't know you," he said. "Or rather, I know you now, and I truly regret it, because I would have loved to meet you much earlier." "Oh, always the poet. Well, you really are unlike any other ladies I've met. But where did you see me?" "At your own home." "Oh. Don't you remember? At night, tired from the day's struggles, you return to your room. There, lighting the candles of thought, you drift away across a calm and peaceful sea. On that journey, some young women accompany you. We are those women utopias, the chimeras." Tito finally understood something that had been trying to tell him for a long time. He smiled and, locking his beautiful dreamy eyes onto Utopia, who stood before him, said, "Ah, so it's really you, comforting friend who eases all my sorrows and pains. It is in your arms that I dry my tears. How good it feels to see you all face to face, so real and close." Utopia looked at him and replied, "And do you want to know," she asked, "who brings us all to be with you? Look, see for yourself." The poet turned his head and saw the wandering vision, his traveling companion. "Ah, it's her," said the poet. "Yes, it's true. It's blonde fantasy, the loyal friend of thinkers and dreamers." Fantasy and Utopia joined hands and gazed at Tito. He, as if enchanted, stared back at both of them. This moment lasted a few seconds. The poet wanted to ask some questions, but just as he was about to speak, he noticed that the two were becoming thinner and more misty. He tried to say something. However, when he saw that they were growing more and more transparent, their faces almost impossible to recognize, he cried out, "What's happening? Why are you vanishing like this?" The shadows faded more and more. The poet ran into the next room, where another strange sight awaited him, one that filled him with fear. All the figures were dissolving, as though made of fog. Shocked and trembling, Tito walked through some halls and finally stepped into the square. Everything around him was going through the same change. Soon, Tito felt the ground disappear beneath his feet and realized he was floating in space. In that moment, he let out a cry of pain. He closed his eyes and gave himself up, as if expecting death to be the end of his journey. That seemed the most likely outcome. After a few seconds, Tito opened his eyes again and saw that he was falling straight down toward a black spot no bigger than an egg. His body tore through the sky like lightning. The dark spot grew larger and larger still, until it became the size of a ball. Tito's fall felt almost devilish. He would let out a groan now and then, and the air hitting his face forced him to shut his eyes again and again. In time, the dark spot now kept growing, until it looked just like Earth. "It's the Earth," Tito said to himself. No words could describe the joy that filled his soul, lost in space, when he realized he was getting close to his home planet. But that joy didn't last long. Tito thought, quite rightly, that at this speed, once he hit the ground, he wouldn't get up again. A chill ran through him. He saw death right in front of him, and gave his soul to God. So he fell, and fell, or rather he came down faster and faster, until, miracle of miracles, he landed on a beach, standing straight, as firm as if he hadn't just made that terrible leap from the sky. At first, when he found himself back on solid ground, he felt pure happiness. Then he tried to figure out where on earth he had landed. He might have fallen in Siberia or China. But no, it was just steps away from home. Tito hurried back to his peaceful house. The candle had burned low. The dog, lying under the table, stared at the door. The poet walked in, threw himself onto the bed, and fell asleep, thinking about what had just happened to him. Since that day, Tito has had the sharp eyes of a lynx. He can tell, at a glance, whether a man has brains or only wild dreams inside his head. I should say, and I mean it, that few people he meets seem to have much else besides those wild dreams. He says so, and I believe him. And honestly, how could I not trust someone who has just returned from such an amazing journey? Someone who dared to look straight into the dazzling throne of the King of Trifles?
Thank you for listening so far. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like our channel and click the bell to be notified whenever a new book is read. Have you heard of Machado de Assis? Machado de Assis, born in Rio de Janeiro in 1839, is considered one of the greatest writers in Brazilian literature and a master of psychological realism. He was a novelist, poet, playwright, and short story writer whose works explore the complexities of human behavior with irony, subtlety, and deep introspection. Among his most famous novels are Dom Casmurro, which questions truth and memory, and the posthumous memoirs of Brás Cubas, a satirical narrative told by a deceased man. Machado's literature often reflects the contradictions of Brazilian society, addressing issues like race, class, power, and identity in a sophisticated yet accessible style. Despite being born into poverty and facing racial prejudice, Machado de Assis rose to become the president of the Brazilian Academy of Letters and a symbol of literary excellence. His sharp wit and profound observations about society and the human soul make his works timeless and universally relevant. Today, he is recognized not only as a Brazilian icon, but also as a world-class author whose legacy continues to influence generations of writers and thinkers. Machado de Assis shows us that literature can be both elegant and critical, intimate and universal, humorous and profound. His stories remain as powerful and thought-provoking today as they were more than a century ago. Machado is a treasure of world literature, and through his voice, we discovered the infinite layers of the human experience.